Well, welcome back to Desk Bound Aviator. I'm Steve, your host, and today we're situated here on the apron of one of the gates at Boston KBOS Logan Airport is what they call it here at Boston. We're going to take a flight from Boston to Chicago O'Hare in a new aircraft, and a beautiful one. It's the Airbus A350, and this is the FlightFactor version of that, and so accordingly it is loaded with all sorts of nice details and some fluky, strange details, which we'll cover as we go through it. Let me just see if I can take you on a little scrolling tour here, going around. Let's look this way, see the winglets. I was going to scroll around the wing, but the doggone wing is so wide that I couldn't even get around it and still encompass the whole aircraft in the view. So let's jump inside. I'm not going to do a tour of the whole inside just yet. We'll do that later on when we're flying and have more time, I think. But there's nothing in there right now except seats. The passengers aren't loaded, so we'll take a look at that a little later. But first things first, I want to get this started up, and I'm going to be following a flight checklist, startup checklist that I've created after watching some very interesting videos by people who know a lot more about this than I do. And while I say that, I also want to add that I am strictly amateur, and I'm the amateur leading the amateurs. If you are a pilot, or if you have more information than I do, then maybe this isn't the video for you. But if you just want to have fun, and you want to learn a little bit about this aircraft from a simmer and an amateur fan of all of this stuff, then let's go ahead and do it. But I just wanted to make that clear beforehand. So the first thing we need to do is take a look at the overhead panel. And right now everything is cold and dark in this aircraft. There isn't anything on. But the first thing you're going to want to do to start things up is to turn on the batteries, which you do by pressing these 4 buttons right here. And then what I do in order to get things going is I turn on the ADIRS, which helps to locate the position of the aircraft accurately. We'll deal with that a little bit more later as we get into programming the FMS, the Flight Management System. So we've got that done, and we've got maybe we can turn on a beacon light. Let me just zoom down in here a little bit so you can see what some of these switches are. Whoops, there, that's a better view. We've got a beacon light down here, and we've got a nav light, but I'll leave that off for the time being. Oh, dims down a little bit, makes it sharper. We can turn on the logo light to auto or on. I'll just go ahead and leave it on position. And that's all we need to do for the time being. Next thing we want to do is go down to a panel over here on the left side of the array of electronic or digital panels that we have in this new aircraft. This is called the OIS, or Onboard Instrument System, I guess it's supposed to be called. And I may not have that right. If I don't have it right by any means, if I don't have any of this stuff right, let me know, will you, in the comments below? Because I'm kind of going on a wing and a prayer here, as they say. So let's zoom in on the OIS, and the first thing you see is it's got a lot of very interesting preferences, settings that you can set and keep them that way. Then if you click on this upper bar here, and by the way, you can click on these screens, they're touch sensitive with your mouse, so you get a big X icon there. So let's go to ground service. Within ground service, you have a tab called doors and hatches. I'm going to go ahead and press this button here called Load Config. And what that does is it loads a preconceived notion of what hatches and doors you want open. You can do those separately, individually, as you like, and I've found that if you do that, you may have difficulty loading the aircraft later on. We'll get to that stage too. From here we go to ground equipment, and the same thing applies here. I would pick auto config. We are at a gate, and I would normally suggest you put plane at gate, but I have found that if I start messing around with these settings in any meaningful way, then it screws up loading the airplane later on. So I'm not going to mess with that. I'm just going to go through the motions here. Ground power units can come on. There are two of them, two little devices down at the nose of the aircraft. They're now connected. And because they're connected, we can go back up here to the overhead and we can activate them by pressing these buttons here, the left and the right ground power systems. And from here, I'm going to jump down to the pedestal. The pedestal is between the pilot and co-pilot, in between the two seats. There are two sections of the pedestal, if you will. This is more or less the front. There's actually more beyond this, but this is the section I'm mainly interested in looking at right at the moment. And it includes the radio control, which is over here. There are a bunch of dials here that you can activate by pressing on. And you can see it lights up a little bit. I don't know if you could actually see that light. I'll do it again. You see how it lights up. I'm not going to bother with any of that other than this particular dial right here. There is an alarm that I get sometimes when I'm taxiing the aircraft, and the only way I've found to disable that alarm is to switch this switch right here to the ILS position. Now up here you have various things, including VHF radio frequencies and so forth. I'm going to switch over here to nav radio, and the nav radio allows me to set my ILS frequency and approach course. The ILS frequency that we're going to pick is in Chicago. Oops, let's go to Chicago and let's get out of that. And let's go to here, to SkyVector. SkyVector, we've got our route set up. We're going to be flying here from Boston to Chicago over here. And let's see, when we get to Chicago, we are going to land on ILS runway 28 right. And the frequency for that, for the ILS system, is 111.10. There's always an O after that first digit. 111.10 and then 273 for the approach course. So we come back here, we'll click on frequency and go 111.10. And it enters it. You can tell now because it's white. If we click on the course, it was 273. And we'll enter that, and that becomes white. Now we can jump over here to Squawk. And in Squawk, we want to have that set to master. The mode we want to have set to auto. And the actual Squawk code we've already pre-established as 2121. We'll leave that alone. And that takes care of the radio settings. Down below here on the lower portion of the panel, there are some dials that you can rotate to adjust lighting down here in the center of the cockpit, underneath the floor, rather underneath, by the pedals, and so forth. And we can also, well, we could shut our cabin door. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. I'll tell you what, while our cabin door is open, let me just take you on a quick tour. I'll turn around here, zoom up, and there's our cabin door, and we'll open that. I think we'll open that. Oh, I know, you got to push it. That's the problem. All right, so we'll push it. We'll come over here, and you'll see there's nobody in their seats yet. Curiously enough, when they load this aircraft, they only load half of it. This is the front section, very well appointed, with a nice little cocktail lounge there. Oh, wait, I'm zooming the wrong key. So as you can see, there's a lot of seats, but not very many passengers, at least not yet. And even when they load them, there's not that many. All right, let's go back here. We now want to go back to the OIS screen. And from ground services, doors and hatches and ground equipment, we want to jump here to airplane. In airplane, we have a tab called passengers. Now in this, you can pick any particular load of passengers and cargo that you like. My experience, however, is that when you do that, it will not actually load. You run into an error here. If someone knows a way around that, I'd appreciate it. What I've been doing to get around that is simply using the pre-established heavy. And by doing that, you then load up the aircraft with 241 passengers, cargo, and so forth. And so then we can implement that. And you see it says passengers and cargo loaded. Fuel is not loaded, so we have to go to the fuel page. And here is interesting. We want to slide that over, and then I'm going to open up Avatab, which I have a key to do, and I'll pick the charts page, and I'll pick KBOS to KORD and zoom in on that. That shows us our planned fuel for the flight today, which we can then enter into these slots on the fuel page within the OIS. First is destination, same as trip in our sim brief chart there, 11847. And I'll hit the enter key. Alternative is 5163. Contingency, CONT, is 2842. APU time, we're going to say 30 minutes, and the same thing for taxi time. Oops, didn't enter. There we go. And TO remain corresponds to final reserve on your sim brief chart, so that's going to be 5197. Enter that, and we are done. We then want to load that, so we press the implement button, and it loads the fuel. Make the sim brief page go away. And from here, let's see, we want to go down to the pedestal again. And there's a bunch of buttons and signals and things here. We want to choose the APU button. We'll activate that. And then we're going to come up to our overhead panel, and we'll go ahead and turn the APU on. Now that takes a little while to crank up. I'll go ahead and hit the button below that, which is start. And then if we go down to the MFD, or the ACAS, whatever they call this center panel on Airbuses, you will see now that the APU is cranking up. When it reaches its full capacity, you'll see an indication that it's on. And now it says APU is available. So if we come back up here, now we can press the APU bleed and the APU generator right there. So those are running. Now, since we're located up on the upper panel, we can go ahead and start to activate some of the other systems now that we've got constant power coming to the aircraft from both the external and the internal power systems. So let's start off down here in the lower left corner. We don't need to do any of the call buttons for the moment. The evacuation is set by default to the captain. We can go ahead and activate the crew oxygen supply. And then we'll scroll up here to cabin settings, wireless, cabin SATCOM, landing camera, and various other settings. These can all go on. And if we come over here to the center, we can turn on the hydraulic system pumps, 4 of them. Come down a little lower. We're in here in the electric system. We can turn on these 5 switches here for the galley, various other systems that require electrical feed. We can turn on the bus time. We can then set up our air conditioning by turning on the packs and rotate this dial to the auto position and these all up to normal centered positions. I'll leave the engine bleed off for the time being. Hot air we can go ahead and turn on. The bleeds can stay off until we actually have engines running. The same is true of engine generators, and the same is true of anti-ice. I will go ahead and turn on the cabin pressure, get that set up. And then we've got some other switches down here amongst the lights. Standby compass we can turn on. The annuator test is a button that you can raise up to the top, and it lights up every light there is on the panel, tests everything, and you can see if anything's missing or burned out, or if there are any errors, and once that's completed, it'll automatically switch back to the bright mode. We'll leave seat belts off for the time being while people are getting settled, and we will turn on the emergency exit lights between the seats. And so that's done there. We'll then go over to the right-hand side of this panel and work our way up. Some of these are on by default. Some of them you need to turn on, like the heater, cargo air conditioner switches, the NSS switches. Not sure exactly what NSS means. I have to look that up. The ground hydraulics can stay on. The vents can all go on. And I think that's about it. All right. So then we want to go to the console, down below. And on the console, you'll see these 3 dials here for attitude, heading, air data, and FMS. You want to leave those right in the center where they are. Over here, you see a switch. I'll zoom in on that so you can read it. It's called anti-skid. You want to make sure that that's turned on by raising it up. This is your auto brake. We'll deal with that later as we make our approach into Chicago. But this button here, which strangely doesn't have a label, I'll go ahead and press that. That's your rejected takeoff button. We want to have that loaded before we take off. All right, APU, cross-feed, emergency, I'm looking down my list, throttles and taw. All right, we'll come back here, take a look down below at throttles, bring those back down to the neutral position. And down below there, we have some buttons and switches here. This is TCAS. We'll leave that as it was. GS mode, we don't need that at the moment. But we do want to turn on the weather TAWS system. That's traffic awareness and avoidance. Or I'm sorry, that's TAWS is terrain awareness system. Terrain awareness system. It tells us when you're close to a mountaintop. TCAS is traffic, and we'll deal with that a little bit later. All right. Then the last step before we set up our FMC is to scroll up just a little bit. You'll see on this aircraft there are 2 flight management computers. Actually, there's this one up on the left. Let me get down here a little bit. Get in a position where you can see these guys. So you have this screen, which is our OIS, our onboard information systems, I think the description of it. The OIS, and then that will show you the flight management computer or the flight management system. Then you also have down below here, only in the FlightFactor Sim, you have this device, which is the TOLUS FMC. And the TOLUS works in companion, if you will, to the onboard digital flight management computer. You can use either one, and you can use TOLUS to refer to, because some of the things that are displayed within the TOLUS are not clearly displayed in the other system, so you might want to use that. I generally avoid using the TOLUS because this isn't a TOLUS aircraft. All right, so again, we're going to come back up here to the center panel and look in this vicinity here. But before we do that, we need to press a button located here on the keyboard entry panel for our flight management computer. And that button is called SURV, as in, I don't know what, survey or something. I have to look that up to see what exactly that SURV stands for. But when you tap it, it shows you on the lower MFD, multifunction display, it shows you the serve window, and within that you see transponder, XPDR, is set to auto by default. TCAS is set to standby. We're going to change that over to TA only, which is used for taxiing. That's our communication with the tower. The weather system can all be turned on, operates automatically, and the TAWS, the terrain avoidance system, or so forth, can be turned on. So those four switches can be turned on. Now, having done that, we want to switch the display. We actually want to take this OIS screen and bring it down here to the middle of the cockpit because we don't use it as much. And we want to take this screen, which is part of our flight management system, and put both of these guys up here. And you do that by just tapping this button right here. So now you've switched the two, and then in order to make the flight FMS, which appears here, a little closer to our operational center, we just want to switch this switch. I'll show you those two just so you understand what's going on. One says OIS center, that brings it down here. The other says display cycle. So we did that. And now that we've set our display cycle in the right position, we can go to survey and pick FMS1. And we are now in the FMS section of the screen, so we'll drop down here to the first tab and pick Init. Init allows us to set up the flight management system for our route today. The first thing we're going to need to do is determine what our route, our flight number is. And I get that from FlightAware. And it is going to be, it's not going to be that, that's something else. It's going to be UA 1251. So let's enter that. UA 1251 should do it. United Airlines from Boston, KBOS, to Chicago, KORD. And our alternate today is going to be Detroit, which is KDTW. Now, we've gone ahead and saved a company route, an FMS flight plan, if you will, and put that in the appropriate folder. We can call that up very easily here just by selecting Route Select. And there's our route within the FMS folder. We select that and apply it, and that now enters the flight management system. From here we can come down and enter in our cruise altitude, which is going to be 340. That automatically enters the cruise temperature from our SimBrief flight plan. We can then refer to SimBrief, again by popping this AVITAB table. And what I'm looking for here is the flight description, some of the details of the flight description. And right here at the top it says CI 43. So we're going to do our cost index. enter that there as 43, and we don't need that. We'll now eliminate, or erase, I should say, the sim brief screen, and then we'll tap on IRS. We can see, because we've set the dials up on the upper panel to align the IRS, that it is now available for loading. So in order to load it, all we need to do is tap that key, and it's now loaded. So the airplane is now centered in the proper navigational position. We return here and we go to departure. The runway we're taking off today on is 22 left, 22 left. And the SID is going to be Highland 5. And there is no transition, so we'll just pick no, and then we'll enter that into the flight plan and insert it. So that's now fixed. Normally then you might select a runway, an approach runway, and a star. We're going to head and, I'm sorry, back up here. I went to the wrong page. Whoops. Highland 5, return. Yeah, we want to pick our arrival airport, which is KORD. Once again, we'll pick the arrival runway. In this case, it's going to be 28 right. And that defines the runway, but then we have to define it a little bit further by designating the ILS version of that runway by selecting that. The VIA, the transition to that approach, is going to be Vogler. We are not going to be using a star, so we'll say none, and we're not going to be, therefore, have a transition to the star that we're not using, so that's all done. Impose that, and then insert it, and we're basically there. Now, what we want to do at this stage is take a look at that route and make sure that everything's copacetic with it. I'm just zooming out here and putting the screen on the preview plan mode. There we go. That shows us our aircraft. Now, what we can do, I've got keys to change our view here. So now we can see our route on the FMS, and we can see it displayed here on the ND. This, by the way, is called the ND, and this is called the FMS. Or the, I'm sorry, this is called the MFD, the MFD, what does that mean? Multifunction display is what it is, right here. They're calling this the multifunction display, and this screen over here in the Airbus, they call it an ND. This is, of course, the primary flight display, or PFD. So it's a little confusing if you hear me talk about the ND and the MFD. This is the MFD over here. All right, so if we use these arrows here, we can then just scoot through the entire route. It will center our chosen waypoint in the middle of that screen. And we'll just keep going along and see if we spot any gaps in that line. And now we're at RMN, and we continue on down to Vogler, and from Vogler on into runway 28 right. So our route is intact. There are no discontinuities. We're in good shape. The next thing we might want to do, the aircraft does have a radio, or it does have a public address system. In order to make that work, you need to rotate this loudspeaker dial here all the way to the right. If you don't do that, it will not work properly. I'm going to turn this selector back to normal view. Then I'm going to zoom in here on our glare shield panel. The first thing we need to do here is set the QNH, or the barometric setting for the aircraft. To do that, I'm just simply going to hit my W key, and that brings up my NOAA METAR plugin. So I'll type in KBOS, hit enter, and it tells me that the QNH right now is 2986. 2986. Put my cursor here pointing downward, and I'll just hold it for a bit, and there it is. I need to do the same thing over here on the first officer's side. So we'll just get that pointer in the right direction and tap a few times and get down to 2986. Again, because I'm not a professional, I tend to not use VORs. I've heard my friends talk about them and I've watched videos on them. And to be perfectly honest with you, I find it cumbersome and a little bit confusing. So I just use the onboard GPS system, which gets me to where I want to get to. You can play around with constraining the display by hitting these keys or not. It's up to you. All right, our flight director is on. I'm going to go ahead and set our cruise altitude. And right now it's set at hundreds. I'm going to crank that up to thousands. When you see the cursor change into that kind of a cursor, you then can use your scroll wheel. And we'll set it at 34. We've got our brakes set. We've got rejected takeoff set. And that is probably about it. Let's just do a little look-see here on my list. Okay. Flight plan preview, loudspeaker, set our altitude. Okay, we want to now turn off the external power. And we do that by just switching off these two buttons here. And then if we go back down to what used to be our OIS screen and is now the lower ND, we'll call it, you want to go to, again, the ground service section, go into doors and hatches. We'll close all the doors. And in ground equipment, there's no close everything here, you just have to select them one by one. And the same with the ground power. So the ground power is now disconnected. I'm going to go back here to doors and handles and leave it set on that page. And next thing is better pushback. So we've got basically everything all set here. What we need to do now is push the aircraft back and start up the engines, which I will do by calling our favorite pushback utility.
Ground to cockpit. Please show me where you want to go.
Where I want to go is actually right where you see that green outline. So I'm going to hit my enter key.
Ground to cockpit. Tow is driving up.
All right, let's go take a look at her. See some traffic going by us. I can see her. France 747. Take a look inside the tractor as he comes up. Underneath the nose. Gear drop.
Okay, all doors and hatches are closed. Ready to connect.
Turn our landing gear, nose gear, just straighten that out a little bit. I'm not sure if I would want to be in that position of that mechanic right there, but you know, he knows what he's doing. He's been doing it for years, so do his job. Oh, this is interesting. For some reason, the gate has backed up, and that tells me that our brake was somehow set on. So something triggered the gate to back up, and I needed to fix that by hitting the park brake. Let's see if it raises him up as well as the airplane. I don't think it will, but you never know. Nope, it didn't.
Tow connected and bypass pin inserted. Release parking brake.
Okay, well, we're not going to see any auto
Starting
feedback.
pushback, and you may start engines.
All right. So to do that, I'll come up here and switch the engine start switch over to ignition start. We've got our fuel all set, ready to go. I'm going to hit this APU button and clear that screen, and then we'll go ahead and crank up engine number 1. Now if we come up here, instead of seeing the APU display, we're seeing the engine display as it ramps up. What we're looking at primarily is the N2 percentage. This is the big N2 fan in the center of the aircraft, and when that gets up to around 20%, it's now introducing fuel rather than from the APU. It's introducing fuel directly from the fuel tanks into the engine, and the engine is running itself. So now we can go back down and crank up number 2. Same thing happens on this side. So now getting up there about 10%. It'll speed up after that, so we'll jump back down here and turn the engine start switch to normal. From here we can go up to the overhead. And since we're now operating off of the engine, we can throw a couple of switches in here. The first one that we'll do will be the generator switches. All 4 of those guys can go on. The engine bleed can go on. The APU, now that we're running off the engine, can come off. And we'll turn off the APU bleed and the APU gen. So all of these now are clear, and that indicates that they're on and they're functioning. We should have gone ahead and activated the seatbelt signs before we backed up. So that's my bad there, a little bad procedure. I'll go ahead while I'm looking at this and turn on the nav light and the strobe light.
Operation complete. Go ahead and set the parking brake.
That's done.
Disconnecting tow. Stand by.
I will do that. As soon as she leaves, we can turn on the nose light and start to taxi on out. Okay, let's get underway here. We'll release the park brake. Give myself a little power. Now, if you're really astute, some of you may notice a little difference in the appearance of things here. Just keeping an eye on our traffic to our left here. Yeah, we've had a little bit of a pause in between sections here, from backing up to here, pause of a day, and the weather's changed a little bit. It's still a nice day, but our wind direction is a little different, so we had to change our departure runway, and we are now going to take off. We're going to follow this guy, this American jet over here. We're going to take off over here on runway 4 right to the north. And our route has changed a little bit. We're going to still wind up in Chicago, but we're going to get there by a little different path. Now, what's he up to? I see. He's turning around. I don't know why they do that. I've been watching these planes taking off, and they all seem to come over here and do a U-turn. I guess they feel they have to back up to the threshold before they take off. All right, we'll let him do that. Let's put the park brake on so we don't roll into him. Whoops, it looks like there's somebody coming in as well. I wonder what he's going to do with that. We're going to be taking off right here on this runway 4 right. Looks like this guy's coming into 4 left, landing right on top of this fellow. Up, there he goes. All right, so he's taking off. Meanwhile, there's another one coming in. It's one of the things you can do in a Sims. You can pop your head right out the window. Let's see if we can spot this guy. Don't see anything yet. Ah, here he comes. Yeah. And it looks like there's another one behind him. All right, so we'll let him land, and we can probably continue taxiing. Let the park brake off, and there he goes, and we'll go ahead and proceed before this other guy gets to us. Okay, 4 right approach is where we want to be. Take that off. We can come up here and turn on all the lights, at least the landing lights. We've got all the other lights on. One thing we do want to do, show you down here, you see we have a section of this lower panel that is identified as TCAS. And we've got a button here, TA only. But there's no button for TA or TARA, which is curious. So what we need to do is come up here to our ND and, or MFD rather. And let's see, we need to go over to the survey page and look at controls. And you see we've got TA only. And I want to click on TARA. Now let's take another look down here, see if that changes things, and it does. It takes the illumination off that button. So I'm not sure why you can't change that from a button on the panel, but that seems to be the way it's done here. So having done that, we can come back over here to our active flight plan and take a look. Let's do a last look at the radar, and it looks like we're clear. So let's proceed out to the runway.
On runway 4 right.
All right. Now what I'm going to do in order to make things a little bit easier to see, first I'll come up here and just stop short of the threshold, put the park brake on, and I'm going to come down here, I'm going to pop these 2 screens, which is a very handy feature of this aircraft, the sim here in FlightFactor. And you can see our spoilers are armed and ready. We've got 1 flap set to first notch. We've got our trim established at 24%, so we're fine for takeoff. We've got an ascent route through various waypoints. Actually, we're going to be going around to the right, as you can see in the MFD, another MFD. I think they call this an ND in the manual for this aircraft. Navigation display, which I suppose makes sense. So, having done all of that, let me just make sure, I want to make sure my, my brakes are on. If I tap that, I can't do it. So let me come in here. The speed brakes are on. It doesn't say anything about the brakes, and I see we are creeping ahead. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and advance the throttle up to toga. And there we go. 500 feet or so. A little bit less than that. So we'll bring the gear up and drop the nose down just a little bit, and let's go ahead and tap on autopilot. Now, as soon as that speed tape gets up above that S, we'll bring the flaps in. And we've got an indication that we want to go back to thrust climb. So our flight has started in good fashion. We'll take a quick look-see at the aircraft. As it climbs out. Pretty nice looking aircraft, I would say. Zoom out a little bit so we get a better view of the whole thing. Not too shabby. It's a pretty good view of Boston down there. So that's going to be it for a while. We've got quite a ways to go, so I will bring you back to this video when things start to get interesting as we approach Chicago, or if anything else happens, you know, if Santa Claus flies by or something weird happens. I'll bring you back. See you soon. Okay, we're back again. Limping along here. During my absence, went and got some lunch and sliced my finger doing it. So I'm operating with limited resources here. Hope it works. Trying to land this thing with one hand might be tricky. So, brought you back a little early. We'll take a couple of breaks on the way here. We're not, you know, a ways away from the top of descent. I've gone ahead and dialed in the target altitude for that. What we can do right now, let's see, we'll take a look down here on the MFD. And I'm going to go to the performance page and switch over. You see a bunch of tabs up here right now. We're active in the cruise tab. I'm going to go over here to approach, where we want to set up our approach settings. And it starts off with the magnetic direction and the wind. And in order to get that, I'll call up my handy little METAR plug-in here and type in KORD for Chicago. Hit enter. Okay, first of all, it tells us that the winds are 310 at 8 knots. So we can type in the magnetic direction, 310. And the speed is 8 knots. The outside air temperature is over here. See it next to 11 knots. Type that in, and the QNH is 3018 in hectopascals. And the barometric pressure, oh wait a minute, QNH, I'm sorry, yeah, is that right? Yes, we're I'm thinking the wrong thing. This is your QNH. When they say baro here, they're talking about minimums, and they want to know whether you're landing with radio settings or with barometric settings. And in order to find that out, I'm going to go back here to the browser and see if I can flip over here to our chart, our approach chart. And it says in Chicago that the distance by radio off the runway for minimums is 200 feet. So we'll switch back over here and we'll use the radio setting and put in 200. Just hit return. Transition is 18,000. Our flap configuration is full. Gives us our approach threshold speeds and final landing speed at 136. And that's all we need to do there. So we can go back to our flight plan. We've got our ways. It doesn't give you a distance to top descent, which is unfortunate. I wish it did. But this doesn't seem to want to do that. It gives you distances between waypoints. So it's a little bit confusing. Found some other interesting features. Oh, one thing I did find out here, that I was looking at the guide that comes with this aircraft. We were looking earlier at the SURV page. This stands for surveillance. So all of your surveillance instruments and controls appear here, such as TCAS, transponder, weather, terrain awareness settings, so forth. So those all appear in the surveillance page. And right now, of course, we're on FMS1. Let's see, there are some other interesting things. There is on the OIS, which is now down here, if you go into this menu, you will see ground services, airplane, cabin announcements. This, by the way, is your cabin announcements. And, you know, as I think we discussed earlier, how you need to activate those. You have to turn on the radio, or the public address system, and then you can go in and play these. I've done them, and I'm not crazy about doing it. They're strange. Below that, you have user's guide. You can actually call up the user guide in this aircraft and look at it while you're flying, which is kind of handy. It's got some useful information in it. There's a page here that says charts, and there is a folder within the aircraft folder called charts. And presumably, if you load that folder with PDF files, you will be able to see those charts displayed here. PDF files of runways, for example, or you know, of patterns. But I tried to do that, and I can't seem to get any of these buttons to work. So I don't know if that function is implemented yet on this aircraft. It may not be, and there's nothing in the guide that says anything about it. What it does say something about, I'll come back here to airplane, rather to ground services, and we'll pick on doors and hatches where we were. What it does say, though, is that there is a dial here, or a button. Down here on the upper pedestal section, you see a button called Video. If you tap that, and then you scroll up, you will see kind of a moving image. Then if you tap it again, you should see a different moving. Oh, I'm not tapping the right one. Let me zoom out just a little bit further. I'm doing all this with basically one hand, folks, so it's a little tricky. Let me do it this way. There. All right. Can I view the button? Yeah, there's the button. So if I tap that again, turns off, and then it should rotate. Ah, there we go. Yeah. You see a kind of an ersatz view of the cabin. So that's a simulation of a video capability that is here in the Airbus A350, where the first officer or the pilot can view the cabin. And this dial right here, below that button, is supposed to enable you to scroll through the various video screens that are available. I tried that and it doesn't work, so that's not implemented. Another thing you can do, if we come up to our upper glare shield pattern, I'll make that video go away here by tapping that. So I'm looking for the right key, folks. There. If we come up to the upper glare shield panel, make that go away too. This is something I wasn't aware of, and reading through the guide while we're cruising here on our way to Chicago, happened to notice there's a button up here called Taxi. Now, we're not on the ground at the moment, so that is not functioning. But when you are on the ground and you're taxiing, if you press that button, you should see a display of a moving image, if you will, of the aircraft taken from the tail of the aircraft, so that you can actually see where you're going if you had a camera placed on the tail, because there is a camera placed on the tail and it will show right here what it looks like. So we'll try that when we get to Chicago. Tap on Taxi, see how that looks. And there's probably a few other bells and whistles on this aircraft that I haven't discovered yet. If any of you know them, share them with me and everybody else in the comments below. And of course, as always, if you have questions, something's puzzling you, or you missed something, or I did something wrong. I know that's hard to believe, but if you find a goof in this video somewhere, by all means let me know. Okay, making our turn here toward the lake. Nice view in the afternoon here. It's a sunny October day.
Air Canada 1250, contact code 33.87. Code 387, 03, contact center 12025, good day.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and activate our approach. Indicates that we've already started to receive our locator. Speed tape now drops down to 240 or so.
Hotel Foxtrot Sierra, thank you. And as I previously mentioned, Challenger traffic.
Go ahead and bring the spoilers in.
Probably approach your 7 o'clock position by 10.
Arm them once again, and now that we're below 250, go ahead and drop down one notch flaps. And that, of course, triggers the speed tape to drop down, or the flight director to indicate the target speed now is 176. 136 was our nominal speed for landing, although with a headwind we probably will have to increase that a bit to compensate. Okay. Descending to 48. And we've now got glide slope. Go ahead and turn on our other AP system. So we've got both systems operating. And we'll drop the gear. Notice the gear direction is kind of interesting on this aircraft, how it tilts forward. That's to compensate for the flare. We're at 150 now. I'm going to go ahead and cancel auto throttle. And let that descend down to about 140. We'll go ahead and throw down the last notch of flaps.
There we go.
80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 40, 30, 30, 20, 20. Ten, 10, 10, 10.
Well, that's nice. Reverse. And some funky screen rate here. This. Avoid getting hit by a tractor. Looks like there's a couple of gates open right here. I think we'll just take advantage of that. Let's go for this one right here. The button I use for brakes is really the park brake, so when I tap it, it's like jamming on the park brakes. So I have to do it a couple of times. And bing, there we go, that's park brakes. Use a keyboard key for me to do that. So let's turn off the lights. Tell the passengers they can get up and move around. I'm going to come down here to our ground service area, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the door on the left-hand side. Cabin pressure inhibited by doors. Door 1 will not close. Indeed it isn't. So first thing I'm going to do, though, is come back up here and I'm going to turn on the power unit. Let's go Down to ground equipment. Let's go ahead and turn on the power. We'll come up here. And we'll click these two guys. So now we've got ground power hooked up to the aircraft. And then go ahead and shut down the engines by coming down here and flipping these two guys. And then if we take a look, you can probably see the auto gate coming up to the aircraft. And then we can welcome our passengers, wish them a good day. And there's a bunch of switches and so forth. I haven't really gone through the exact procedure for shutting off all these switches, so I need to study that. But in any case, here we are in Chicago. I'm glad you joined me for the trip today. It was fun for you, and it's a neat aircraft. Let me just take another look outside. If I can find the key to do that. There we go. There's our auto gate. The Airbus A350. What a big, beautiful aircraft. A lot of fun to fly. A couple of things in the systems for FlightFactor that I'm not crazy about, but what are you going to do? It's really a good model. It's got a lot more. I've got to learn a lot more about it. So thanks for joining me today. This is Steve, your host. Desk-bound aviator. I will definitely try this aircraft again, and by then hopefully I'll have learned some new things about it and share them with you. And vice versa. If you know some things about it that I don't know, share it with me and with others by posting a comment down below. So I'll see you soon.